It was a quiet Thursday evening in Los Angeles, the kind where the streets hummed with the usual bustle of the city, cars rushing to their destinations, people chatting on the sidewalks, the low murmur of late-night cafes. Elon Musk, the tech mogul and founder of SpaceX and Tesla, had been looking forward to a simple dinner. Just a night to unwind, a brief respite from the chaos of the business world. He arrived at the restaurant, an exclusive spot favored by celebrities, business tycoons, and the city's elite. Its elegant, understated decor boasted a clientele that often didn't need reservations, but Elon did. Tonight, he'd hoped for peace and privacy, just another regular evening, no interruptions. As he stepped inside, the hostess greeted him with a warm smile. She knew who he was, of course. Everyone did. "Mr. Musk, we have your table ready." The soft clinking of glasses and the rustle of crisp linen napkins filled the air as he walked to his seat. The restaurant was a favorite of many high-profile individuals, and Elon was no stranger to dining in places like this. But tonight felt different. The usual calm of his surroundings seemed to have a slight edge to it. Maybe it was just the week catching up with him, the relentless pace of life at the top of the tech world. Or maybe it was something more. As he sat down, the staff was particularly attentive, almost too eager. The waiter, a young man with a nervous smile, appeared before him almost instantly, ready to take his order. "What can I get for you tonight, Mr. Musk?" Elon glanced up, offering a faint smile. "Just the steak. Medium rare. I'll start with a glass of red wine." The waiter nodded, hurrying off to place the order. Elon leaned back in his chair, glancing around the room. The lights were dim, casting a soft glow over the polished wooden tables. The buzz of conversation surrounded him, but he felt a certain tension in the air, an electricity that felt just a bit off. It wasn't until a few moments later that he realized what had shifted. Someone was watching him. Not in the casual, "Oh, that's Elon Musk" way, but in a much more intense, calculating manner. As he sipped his wine, a murmur rippled through the room. The whispers grew louder. Then, he felt a tap on his shoulder. "Excuse me, Mr. Musk." A voice was tentative, but firm. He turned to see the restaurant manager, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes. "There's been an issue, and we're going to have to ask you to leave." Elon blinked in surprise. "What? Excuse me?" The manager cleared his throat. "We've had complaints about your behavior this evening. We're going to have to ask you to leave the premises." The words didn't register immediately. He stared at the manager, trying to make sense of the situation. "Complaints? About me?" "Yes, sir," the manager said, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "I'm afraid it's best if you leave now." The room fell silent. Every eye was now on Elon. The buzz of conversation stopped as if the very air had thickened. People watched, waiting for him to react, expecting an explosion, a scene. Instead, they were met with something they didn't expect. Elon remained calm, his face unreadable. "Is there something specific I've done wrong?" Musk's voice was cool, his brow furrowing slightly. The manager hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Well, a guest complained about your comments regarding the food and service. They felt it was inappropriate." Elon's mind raced. He couldn't recall saying anything that could have warranted such a reaction. Sure, he had made a few remarks earlier about the temperature of his wine, minor complaints he'd thought nothing of. Yet, here he was, being escorted out of a restaurant that he had been a patron of on several occasions. "I didn't mean to offend anyone," he said, his tone measured but now tinged with frustration. "Can I speak with the guest who made the complaint?" The manager shook his head. "They've asked not to be identified." Elon sat there for a moment, the realization of what was happening sinking in. He had been kicked out of the restaurant, not because of any outburst, but because of a simple complaint from an anonymous guest. It wasn't just a small matter of bad service or poor food, it was about perception, power, and the way people saw him. The whispers in the room grew louder as he stood up. The tension was palpable, the crowd shifting uncomfortably in their seats. No one dared speak, but everyone was watching him. It was as though the entire atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted from casual dining to an interrogation. Elon stood up slowly, placing his napkin on the table. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make a scene. Instead, he just gave the manager a brief nod, then turned and walked toward the exit, the room still silent behind him. When the door closed behind him, the murmurs started up again. Outside, a soft breeze greeted him, cool against his skin. It felt surreal, like a bad dream he couldn't wake up from. This wasn't just an awkward moment, it was a public humiliation, and he hadn't even known why it had happened. As he climbed into his car, his mind churned. He couldn't understand how something so trivial had escalated so quickly. What had he done to deserve this treatment? Was it because of who he was? Or was it something else entirely? Elon pulled out his phone, swiping through the messages and notifications. His inbox was flooded with questions, with headlines already cropping up about his disastrous dinner. It seemed that the world had already heard about the incident, and opinions were beginning to form. But what would his response be? How would he handle this? One thing was certain, this wasn't just another dinner mishap. This was a defining moment, not just for him, but for how people viewed power, influence, and the price of being a public figure. He wasn't just a man who ran companies, he was now a spectacle, and that reality was beginning to sink in. The question lingered in his mind, what would happen next? What did this incident mean for his legacy, his public image, and his very sense of self? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk wasn't always the enigmatic figure who sparked debates and captured headlines. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, in 1971, he came into the world under ordinary circumstances, with no hint of the extraordinary trajectory his life would soon follow. His childhood wasn't marked by silver spoons or inherited wealth. Instead, it was defined by an insatiable curiosity and a fierce desire to understand the world around him. Even as a young boy, Elon displayed an aptitude for technology and an obsession with problem-solving. At age 12, Elon taught himself computer programming and created and sold a simple video game called Blaster for $500. His early experience with technology was a glimpse into his future, one where he would shape the world through innovation. But the journey was never easy. Growing up, Elon wasn't the most popular kid in school. He was often bullied, spending much of his time with his nose in books or dreaming about his next big idea. He'd later admit that his tendency to retreat into books was his way of coping with the loneliness and isolation he sometimes felt. In his teenage years, Musk's ambition began to crystallize. His father, Elon Musk, was an engineer and a strong influence on his technical thinking, though their relationship would become strained in later years. Elon's parents divorced when he was young, and his relationship with his father was never easy. Despite the tension at home, Elon found his calling in science fiction and technology. By the time he was 17, he moved to Canada to attend Queen's University before transferring to the University of Pennsylvania in the United States, where he earned degrees in both economics and physics. His time at Penn marked the beginning of his obsession with shaping the future. His mind was always a few steps ahead of everyone else, thinking about Mars, artificial intelligence, renewable energy, and the advancement of technology. He was relentless in his pursuit of knowledge. But beyond the headlines of his immense success, there was always the human side of Elon that many overlooked, the side of him that wasn't just about making billions or launching rockets into space. There was a man, a father, a son, someone who wrestled with his own demons. Elon's journey through the public eye wasn't just about his ideas, it was about how those ideas forced him to confront his limits and his identity. In the early days of his career, Musk wasn't widely known, and his first ventures reflected his growing desire to create things that could change the world. He co-founded Zip2, a software company that helped newspapers transition to online platforms. The company was sold for nearly $300 million, a massive sum for someone just starting out. Musk then launched X.com, which eventually morphed into PayPal and was sold to eBay for $1.5 billion. That success, however, was just the beginning. In 2002, Musk used the proceeds from the PayPal sale to fund what would become his true passion, SpaceX. Musk's vision was never just about making money, it was about pushing humanity forward. He wanted to make space travel accessible, to reduce the cost of sending humans to Mars, and to ultimately ensure the survival of humanity beyond Earth. SpaceX faced years of failure and rejection, with many dismissing Musk as a dreamer. But he was relentless. Each failure only fueled his drive, and each success, though hard-won, came with its own set of struggles. The same could be said about Tesla. While the electric car company now stands as a global symbol of innovation and sustainability, its early days were fraught with financial strain and skepticism. Musk had to fight for the company's survival, raising money, dealing with production delays, and proving the viability of electric vehicles. He faced pressure from investors and critics, who often questioned his ability to bring Tesla to the level of other automotive giants. Yet, Musk pressed on, driven by the belief that electric vehicles were the future of sustainable energy. But with success came a unique set of challenges. Elon Musk, the visionary entrepreneur, became a public figure whose every move was dissected. The media painted him as a genius, a workaholic, and sometimes even as an eccentric billionaire whose behavior was as unpredictable as his business ventures. His controversial tweets and bold statements often made headlines. He was seen as both a hero and a villain, depending on who you asked. His approach to business and leadership was unconventional, and that made him a lightning rod for both admiration and criticism. For all the admiration Musk garnered, there were moments when the weight of being a public figure took its toll. His first marriage to Justine Musk ended in divorce, and his relationship with his children, 5 sons, including twins and triplets, became complicated by his relentless work schedule. Musk married Tallulah Riley twice, but that relationship, too, ended in divorce. There were rumors, scandals, and allegations about his personal life that fueled the public's fascination with him. Yet through it all, Musk remained laser-focused on his mission. Despite his fame, despite the negative press, he kept pushing forward. This made him a polarizing figure. Some saw him as the future of humanity, a man willing to take risks to change the world. Others saw him as a reckless billionaire, out of touch with the struggles of everyday people. And then, there were those who thought he was simply playing a game, a chess match with the future that only he seemed to understand. In recent years, Musk's reputation had been defined as much by his controversies as his innovations. His tweets had sparked stock market fluctuations, his company's decisions were scrutinized on a global scale, and his presence on social media had made him a figure both adored and ridiculed by millions. But the truth was, underneath it all, Musk was a man driven by something greater than fame or fortune. He was obsessed with progress, with pushing the boundaries of what was possible. His ambitions had always been about far more than creating the next big product, they were about shaping the future of humanity itself. Yet, despite all the groundbreaking achievements and fame, Elon Musk, the man behind the headlines, remained something of an enigma. Was he truly the genius the world believed him to be? Or was he simply someone willing to gamble with everything, at all costs, in the name of progress? The truth, it seemed, was more complicated than any headline could capture. As Elon sat in the quiet corner of that high-end restaurant, surrounded by murmurs and stares, it was hard not to think about how he'd gotten here. How every triumph and every failure had led him to this moment. And yet, this moment, being asked to leave the restaurant, a scene unfolding around him, was a reminder that his journey was far from over. What did this incident mean for him? Would it tarnish the image he had worked so hard to build? Or would it serve as yet another lesson in a life filled with both spectacular achievements and humbling setbacks? Elon Musk had been used to controversy. In fact, it often seemed as though controversy followed him wherever he went. Whether it was his provocative tweets, bold business decisions, or public clashes with critics, he had long been a magnet for attention, both positive and negative. But the incident at the restaurant was different. It wasn't just another headline about his eccentric behavior. It was something more personal. Something that struck at the very heart of his public persona. As the news about Elon Musk being kicked out of the restaurant spread like wildfire, social media exploded. The headlines were everywhere: Elon Musk kicked out of upscale restaurant, what happened behind closed doors? Musk's restaurant outburst shocks Los Angeles elite. The reactions were mixed. Some laughed it off as just another Musk moment, while others were quick to point out the arrogance and entitlement they believed was behind his expulsion. But amidst the noise, one question persisted: what had really happened that night? In the days that followed, Elon found himself at the center of a media storm. It was as if the world had decided to pick apart every detail of the incident, analyzing every nuance of his behavior. Why had he been kicked out? What had he said? Had he been rude? Arrogant? Or was it something else entirely, something deeper that had prompted the restaurant staff to ask him to leave? The initial news reports were contradictory. Some claimed that Musk had gotten into a heated argument with the waitstaff about the food. Others suggested he had been disruptive in some way, perhaps causing a scene in front of the other diners. A few conspiracy theories even started to take hold, suggesting that the whole thing had been orchestrated by someone with a personal vendetta against him. But Elon knew the truth, and it wasn't as dramatic as some of the stories that were being spun. He hadn't caused a scene. He hadn't raised his voice or thrown anything. All he had done was express mild dissatisfaction with the temperature of his wine and make a few comments about the service. Small things that any customer might say when they're paying top dollar for an experience. But the way the situation escalated, it didn't make sense. There had to be more to the story. Elon had always been one to analyze situations, and this one was no different. As he sat in his office, reviewing the endless notifications on his phone and scrolling through the reports that seemed to pile up by the minute, he realized something: the story wasn't about the restaurant or the food. It wasn't even about him personally. It was about the way the public had already formed its opinions before the full picture was even clear. The media had turned the incident into a spectacle, and now everyone had an opinion about it, an opinion about him. His public image had always been a double-edged sword. To some, he was a hero, a visionary whose ideas would change the world. To others, he was an arrogant billionaire who lived in a bubble of privilege, far removed from the struggles of ordinary people. But the incident at the restaurant had made him something else entirely: a punchline. For the first time in years, Elon felt the sting of public opinion. The online backlash was swift and unforgiving. His Twitter feed was flooded with criticism, mocking memes, and sarcastic comments. Some users suggested that he thought too highly of himself, that the world didn't revolve around his whims. Others were more scathing, accusing him of being out of touch and entitled. But the most cutting comments came from those who suggested that he was too thin-skinned, that a person of his stature shouldn't care about such trivial matters. "It's just dinner, Musk. Get over it," one user tweeted. Another added, "Musk got kicked out of a restaurant and is now playing the victim card." How typical. The online outrage was deafening, and it seemed as if everyone was piling on, eager to tear him down. Even the people who had once defended him, the fans and the supporters, were starting to turn on him. It was as if the very public that had once celebrated his genius was now demanding that he explain himself, to justify his actions, to explain why he had become the subject of ridicule. And yet, despite the relentless barrage of criticism, Elon couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The situation wasn't just about what happened at the restaurant, it was about the way people viewed him. This wasn't just a moment of bad press, it was a deeper reflection of how his every move, every word, was scrutinized. The feeling of being misunderstood wasn't new to Musk. In fact, it had been a constant throughout his life. People had always doubted him, dismissed his ideas as too far-fetched, too risky. But this time felt different. This wasn't just about doubting his business ventures or his lofty goals for space exploration, it was about doubting him as a person. His character was under attack, and there was no clear way to fight back. To make matters worse, the media coverage was getting more sensational by the day. The restaurant incident had taken on a life of its own. What had been a simple exchange of words about a restaurant experience had now become a symbol of everything people either loved or hated about him. In the press, he was either portrayed as a misunderstood genius or a spoiled billionaire with no self-awareness. But what Elon found most frustrating was that the narrative had taken on a life of its own, far beyond the initial incident. No one seemed to care about the truth, they just wanted the drama. The public had already decided who he was, and there seemed to be little room for nuance or understanding. He spent hours in his office, sifting through messages and trying to respond to some of the criticism. But no matter how much he explained, it never seemed to make a difference. The stories were out there, the memes were circulating, and the damage to his public image was done. It wasn't long before other public figures began to weigh in, some of them taking advantage of the situation to get their own piece of the spotlight. Critics began to emerge from every corner, commentators who had always been skeptical of Musk's approach to business, those who thought his personality was too abrasive, too unconventional. And now, they had the perfect ammunition. I think this is the perfect example of why someone like Elon Musk should never be in charge of anything, one prominent journalist said on a news program. He has no regard for people, no empathy for the service industry. His wealth has clearly made him out of touch with reality. The tension around the situation only deepened as the narrative continued to evolve. But Elon wasn't the only one affected. As the days wore on, the impact of the incident started to spread to his companies, as well. Investors began to ask questions. Was his leadership being compromised by his personal controversies? Could they continue to back a man who seemed to be the target of so much public scorn? Musk knew he had to respond. But how? How could he explain himself in a way that would make a difference? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that there was no easy answer. The conflict had already escalated far beyond his control. It wasn't just about a dinner, it was about the public's perception of him, and that perception was becoming harder and harder to change. For Elon Musk, the battle wasn't just against the restaurant or its guests, it was against the very way the world saw him. And the question was, how would he fight back? Elon Musk had always been a man who thrived in the chaos of uncertainty. It was a quality that had propelled him to unimaginable heights, through rocket failures, car production delays, and countless public critiques. But as the media frenzy surrounding his restaurant incident reached a fever pitch, Elon found himself facing a new kind of challenge, a personal crisis of identity. This wasn't just about public image anymore, this was about understanding himself, his purpose, his vulnerabilities, and his place in a world that seemed to be turning on him. For days after the incident, he barely left his home. The pressure was relentless. Calls from his PR team, his investors, friends, and even family were constant. Everyone had an opinion. The media continued to churn out stories about him, spinning narratives based on half-truths, assumptions, and sound bites. Some were sympathetic, others scathing, but all of them seemed to be missing the point. The question wasn't about whether he had been rude at a restaurant, it was about who he was, who the world thought he was, and whether he could continue to lead in the face of so much criticism. At first, he tried to do what he always did, control the narrative. He posted a tweet explaining what had happened in the restaurant, attempting to clarify the situation. "I didn't cause a scene at the restaurant. I simply asked for the wine to be replaced. This got blown out of proportion," he wrote. But the response was predictable. His post was dissected, ridiculed, and further amplified by pundits who had already made up their minds. It felt like a futile exercise. His attempts to explain himself were overshadowed by the narrative others had created. Frustrated, Elon retreated further into his work. For a while, he buried himself in the demands of Tesla and SpaceX, trying to divert his attention from the media storm. The rocket launches, the electric cars, the missions to Mars, they were all still moving forward. But even the thrill of innovation and progress couldn't silence the hum of public judgment that echoed in the background of his mind. Every time he walked into a meeting, every time he spoke at a press conference, he felt like he was under a microscope. It was as if the restaurant incident had become a permanent stain on his record, an event that overshadowed everything else he had accomplished. Still, Elon couldn't let go of the feeling that something deeper was at play here. As much as he wanted to ignore it, he couldn't help but wonder, was there a pattern to these incidents? Did people always misunderstand him? Was he destined to be forever misunderstood? Was this really the way the world saw him, despite everything he had done? A pioneer in electric cars, a man who had made space travel a reality for private companies, someone who had revolutionized industries across the board. Could all of that really be boiled down to a single moment of frustration in a restaurant? As he sat in his office late one night, staring at the screens in front of him, his mind began to wander. Elon had always been driven by a deep sense of purpose, to revolutionize humanity's future, to take risks that others wouldn't dare. But lately, that sense of purpose had felt distant, clouded by the noise of the present. He thought about his early years, the hours spent thinking about the possibilities of the future, the excitement of creating something new, the joy of building companies from nothing. In the early days, it hadn't been about the money or the fame, it had been about making a difference. Somewhere along the way, that pure passion had become muddled with the expectations of the world around him. Elon's thoughts turned to his children. His 5 sons, each with their own unique personality, their own futures to be shaped. He thought about how much he loved them, how he wanted them to be proud of him, but also how much pressure he placed on himself to be a role model. He wasn't just building the future of space and energy, he was building the future for them. His vision had always been about creating a world where humanity could thrive, where the next generation wouldn't be burdened by the same environmental and existential challenges that face today's world. But could he live up to that ideal? He felt a surge of frustration, at the situation, at himself, and at the world that seemed to have suddenly turned against him. But deep down, Elon knew that frustration wasn't the solution. He couldn't let this moment define him. He had to get back to the core of why he had started this journey in the first place, to solve big problems, to break barriers, and to inspire change. Elon knew the answer wasn't in defending himself. The answer was in continuing to push forward. His journey wasn't over, it had barely begun. If anything, this moment of conflict was just another hurdle, a test of his resolve. And tests like this, whether in the form of a failed rocket launch or a restaurant incident, were nothing new. He had faced setbacks before, and he would face them again. The key was in how he responded. Would he let the world's perception of him control his actions? Or would he rise above it, stay true to his vision, and keep moving forward? It was time to turn the narrative around. With a newfound sense of determination, Elon set a plan into motion. The first step, he would address the situation head-on, not in a defensive way, but in a way that reasserted his purpose and his vision. He would do what he had always done, let his work speak for itself. The next day, he made a decision. He would give a public interview, not about the restaurant incident, but about the future. He would talk about Tesla's progress in sustainable energy, the groundbreaking work SpaceX was doing to make Mars a reality, and the work he was doing with Neuralink and the Boring Company to change how humans lived and interacted with technology. He would remind the world that his mission was about more than a momentary outburst, it was about shaping the future. He reached out to a trusted journalist, someone he had worked with before, and arranged for the interview. In the conversation, he made it clear that he wasn't going to dwell on the past. "I'm not interested in defending myself for what happened at that restaurant," he said in the interview. "But I am interested in talking about how we can build a better future. That's what matters to me." As the interview aired, something unexpected happened, people started to listen. Instead of focusing on the restaurant incident, the conversation shifted back to the bigger picture. The more Elon spoke about the challenges he was facing, both personally and professionally, the more people began to see him not as a villain, but as someone who was human, someone who was willing to confront his own flaws and keep moving forward. The incident at the restaurant was still part of the narrative, but it was no longer the defining moment. Instead, it became a small bump in the road of a much larger journey. Elon Musk had faced the conflict head-on and had chosen to move beyond it, focusing on the work that truly mattered. As the media began to shift its focus back to the innovations that defined him, Musk realized something important: he didn't need to explain himself to anyone. His work spoke for itself. And in that moment, he knew that despite the chaos, despite the criticism, the journey ahead was still his to shape. The days after Elon Musk's public interview were a blur of mixed emotions. On one hand, the interview had done exactly what he had hoped: it refocused the narrative on the work he was doing, on the innovations driving the future. His words about sustainable energy, space exploration, and human advancement had sparked fresh conversations across media outlets. Tesla's stock surged slightly, investors seemed reassured, and even some of his critics admitted that his broader vision was still impressive. But there was still a part of him that couldn't shake the deeper unease. Despite the positive shift, the restaurant incident remained a stain on his public image. It was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. Musk had faced public criticism before, but this felt different. It wasn't just about the usual controversies or challenges, it was about who he was as a person, how others saw him, and whether he could continue to lead effectively in a world that seemed increasingly harsh and unforgiving. Musk found himself replaying the incident over and over in his mind. It was haunting him, like a bad dream he couldn't escape. How had it gotten so out of hand? Why had he reacted the way he did? Was there something deeper, something more personal, that had triggered his response? The frustration with the restaurant, the feeling of being treated unfairly, had tapped into something deeper within him, a sense of vulnerability he rarely showed to the world. The quiet doubt, the fear that despite all his success, he would still be seen as an arrogant billionaire out of touch with reality. The criticism stung in a way that no other challenge had before. It wasn't the professional battles he feared, it was the emotional weight of being misunderstood. He had always been the one to push boundaries, to take risks, to stay focused on the bigger picture. But as the restaurant incident unfolded, he realized something important: the bigger picture didn't just involve the tech he was building, the companies he was leading, or the goals he was striving to achieve. It involved him. His humanity. His relationships. His ability to confront his own imperfections and still push forward. The emotional climax of the entire ordeal came on an afternoon, just a week after the interview aired. Elon was at home in his study, pacing in front of the large windows that overlooked his property. He stared out into the distance, as if searching for something, a sign, perhaps, or an answer he couldn't yet articulate. The world outside was still, the kind of calm only found in the moments before a storm. The weight of the past week had begun to feel too heavy, and he needed to make sense of it all. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. It was a number that had always brought him comfort, though he'd been hesitant to reach out for fear of appearing vulnerable. But today was different. He needed to talk to someone who understood him, someone who could remind him of the bigger picture. "Hey, Mom. It's Elon," he said when the call was answered. "Hi, sweetie," his mother, May Musk, responded. Her voice was warm, calm, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions swirling within him. "How are you? You sound a little tense." "I'm okay," Elon replied, his voice softer than usual. "Actually, no, I'm not. I feel like I'm losing control of everything. The restaurant incident. I can't stop thinking about it. It's everywhere, and he paused, taking a deep breath. I feel like no matter what I do, people will always see me as this villain." May Musk was quiet for a moment, sensing her son's inner turmoil. Then, in her usual direct but loving way, she spoke. "Elon, you've never been afraid to take risks. You've built empires from scratch. But this isn't about the restaurant. This is about your humanity. You're not perfect. None of us are. But what matters is how you rise from these moments, not how they define you. Her words hit him harder than he expected. It was the kind of truth he had been running from. The world had always viewed him through a lens of greatness, of invincibility. And yet, the one thing he had been avoiding, his own vulnerability, was exactly what had made him feel so disconnected from the public's perception of him. "You're right," Elon muttered. "I've spent so much time focusing on the big goals, SpaceX, Tesla, the mission to Mars, that I forgot about what makes me, me. My own flaws, my humanity. I think I've been afraid of showing any weakness because people expect perfection from me." May chuckled softly. "Elon, you've never been perfect. But you've always been driven by something bigger than yourself. Don't let one moment, one bad experience, define you. Remember why you started all of this, to make a difference, to change the world. And that's still what matters." A weight seemed to lift off his chest as he listened to his mother's words. It was a reminder he hadn't realized he needed. He had been so focused on the external pressures, on the expectations of the world, that he had forgotten the internal drive that had propelled him forward all these years. The passion to build something that lasted, to leave a legacy for humanity, to solve problems that seemed impossible. That had always been his true motivation. Not fame, not fortune, but purpose. "Thanks, Mom," Elon said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I needed to hear that." "I know you did," she replied with a smile in her voice. "Just remember, your worth isn't defined by how the world sees you. It's defined by how you see yourself. And I've always believed in you." After hanging up, Elon stood in front of the window, looking out once again, but this time with a different perspective. The sky was beginning to darken, the sun setting in the distance. He realized that the restaurant incident, while painful, had opened his eyes to something important, the need for balance. He didn't need to be perfect. He didn't need to shield himself from every criticism or question. What mattered was that he remained true to himself, and that he continued to lead with purpose, even when it was difficult. In the weeks that followed, Elon's approach began to shift. He spoke more openly about his personal struggles, acknowledging that he wasn't immune to the challenges of life, despite his many achievements. He shared more about his emotions, about the toll that public scrutiny had taken on him, but also about the lessons he had learned. And most importantly, he focused on his work, doubling down on the projects that had always inspired him, using the recent events as a source of motivation. The media began to notice a change. The harsh criticisms softened, and even some of his most vocal detractors acknowledged his growth. Elon wasn't just a tech mogul anymore, he was a human being, someone who was willing to face his own flaws and rise above them. And in the process, he had regained something that had been lost for a while, his sense of peace. The emotional climax of his journey was not about the resolution of the restaurant incident, it was about the deeper realization that his humanity, his flaws, and his struggles were not weaknesses. They were the very things that made him relatable, authentic, and capable of inspiring others to reach for the stars. The weeks following his emotional breakthrough were a period of quiet reflection and surprising clarity for Elon Musk. He had taken a step back, not just from the media frenzy surrounding the restaurant incident, but from the unrelenting pressure of his multiple companies. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself the space to breathe and reflect on the deeper questions in life. It wasn't about the next Mars mission or the newest Tesla innovation anymore. It was about understanding himself, his place in the world, and what legacy he truly wanted to leave behind. Elon found himself spending more time with his family. He realized how much of his life had been consumed by work, and how his relationships had sometimes taken a back seat. His children, in particular, were a constant source of grounding. They reminded him of the simple joys in life, laughter at the dinner table, shared moments of discovery, and the love that connected them. For a man whose work had always been his primary focus, these moments were now a lifeline. He also found solace in the friendships he had built over the years, people who saw him not as a billionaire tech mogul but as Elon, the person. It was in these relationships that he realized something important: true connections weren't built on public success, but on vulnerability, trust, and shared experiences. The moments when he felt human, not invincible, were the times that brought him the most peace. But the most profound shift in his mindset came when he revisited his original mission, the mission that had first inspired him to build SpaceX, Tesla, and all the other ventures that had followed. It had never been about personal glory or fame. He had always been motivated by a desire to change the world, to push humanity forward, to solve problems that seemed insurmountable. The incidents and distractions, the criticisms and challenges, those were just part of the journey. They didn't define him. What defined him was his commitment to the future, to the belief that he could make a difference, no matter the obstacles. And so, Elon Musk made a decision. He would no longer allow himself to be dragged into the vortex of public opinion, the constant cycle of media scrutiny and personal attacks. Instead, he would focus on his work, but with a renewed sense of purpose. He would not only build innovative technologies, he would also lead by example, showing that true strength comes not from avoiding failure or criticism, but from embracing it and moving forward. He would use his platform to share the lessons he had learned, particularly about the importance of resilience, vulnerability, and self-awareness. One of the first steps in this new approach was a public letter he penned to his employees, investors, and supporters. It was not a letter defending his actions at the restaurant or rehashing the controversy. Instead, it was a letter about growth, about learning from mistakes, and about the importance of staying true to one's values. The letter read, "To my fellow innovators and dreamers. I've spent much of my life pushing boundaries, whether that's in the realm of electric vehicles, space exploration, or human potential. I've taken risks, faced challenges, and made mistakes along the way. But through it all, one thing has remained constant: my belief in the power of change, of progress, and of creating a better future for all of us. Recently, I found myself at a crossroads, facing criticism, questioning my own actions, and wondering if I had lost sight of the very things that inspired me to start this journey. I've come to realize that in our pursuit of greatness, we can't always control how we are perceived, nor should we strive for perfection. What matters is how we respond when things don't go as planned, how we rise after we fall, and how we learn from our mistakes. I want to be clear, my mission has always been to change the world. And I believe that together, with all of you, we are on the verge of doing just that. But we must never lose sight of the fact that we are human, imperfect, fallible, and always learning. This journey isn't just about the end goal, it's about how we get there, the people we become along the way, and the lessons we learn in the process. Thank you for your continued support. Let's keep pushing forward, together, toward a brighter future." The letter was met with an overwhelming response. His employees, investors, and the public saw a side of Elon that they hadn't seen before, a man who was willing to acknowledge his flaws and show vulnerability. It resonated deeply with those who had always admired his vision but were often frustrated by his aloof, sometimes detached persona. This letter, however, gave them a glimpse into the person behind the public figure, a leader who was human, just like them. The media, too, began to shift in tone. While some outlets continued to reference the restaurant incident, many now focused on the broader message Elon was sending. The narrative that had once been about his arrogance and outbursts began to evolve into a story of growth, resilience, and the importance of facing adversity head-on. It was a story that people could relate to, one that wasn't just about business or technology, but about the human experience. Through all of this, Elon began to feel a sense of peace that had eluded him for years. He realized that, ultimately, his legacy wouldn't be built on his successes or failures alone. It would be defined by the way he responded to the challenges he faced, the way he inspired others to keep going, even when things got tough. The emotional turmoil of the restaurant incident, while painful, had led him to this moment of reflection and growth. It had reminded him of the importance of staying grounded, of never losing sight of the bigger picture. In the end, Elon Musk understood that his true legacy wasn't about being perfect, it was about making a difference, learning from mistakes, and showing others that even the greatest of us are, at our core, just human. Elon Musk had spent the past few months rediscovering his balance, focusing on his work, his family, and the lessons he had learned. The restaurant incident had faded from the media spotlight, and with it, the constant barrage of public criticism. His approach to life and leadership had changed, and he was determined to keep pushing forward, but with a renewed sense of humility. It felt as though he was in control of the narrative again, and for the first time in a long while, he wasn't running from his past mistakes. He had learned from them and was ready to move on. However, just as everything seemed to be settling into a new rhythm, the unexpected happened. It all started with a cryptic email from one of his trusted advisors, a figure in his orbit who had always been in the background, helping manage everything from his businesses to his personal affairs. The email was short, almost unnervingly so. It simply read: "We need to talk. Urgently. This isn't what you think." Elon stared at the screen, the familiar sense of unease creeping back into his mind. He clicked on the reply button without hesitation. "What's going on?" "I'm in a meeting right now." Seconds later, a follow-up message appeared, more detailed but still cryptic. "It's about the restaurant incident. Someone has been trying to get in touch with you. They have information that could change everything. I think you need to meet them. I'm setting up a meeting for later today." Elon's mind raced. He couldn't imagine what could possibly be so important about the restaurant incident that warranted another meeting about it. He had assumed everything related to it had been dealt with. In fact, he had nearly forgotten about it, focusing instead on his future goals and the direction he wanted to take with his companies. But now, something didn't sit right. As the meeting time approached, Elon felt his pulse quicken. Was this some kind of setup? Or was it a legitimate concern? He was used to dealing with challenges, but this felt different. Something about the tone of the emails made him uneasy. His instincts were telling him to be cautious, but also that there was something more to this than met the eye. When he arrived at the location, a quiet conference room in one of his office buildings, his advisor was already there, standing beside a man Elon had never seen before. The stranger was middle-aged, dressed in a suit, and had a calm yet serious demeanor. There was an air of urgency about him that Elon couldn't ignore. The advisor introduced him. "Elon, this is Daniel Green. He's someone who's been following a trail of information connected to the restaurant incident. He believes there's something you need to know." Elon sat down, his mind still swirling with confusion. "What are you talking about?" he asked, the skepticism in his voice clear. "I thought we were past this. The media's moved on, and frankly, I've got more important things to focus on." Daniel Green didn't waste any time. He placed a folder on the table in front of Elon, opening it to reveal a series of photographs and documents. "I understand that, Mr. Musk. And I'm not here to dredge up the past. But you need to understand that what happened that night was just the tip of the iceberg. There are things you don't know. Things that could have a far-reaching impact on your life, your companies, and your reputation." Elon raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" Green sighed, clearly weighing his words carefully. "I've been tracking a series of events that stem from the dinner at that restaurant. There are individuals, powerful ones, who have been manipulating the narrative surrounding you for a long time. They used that moment to create a narrative, one that is far more complex than you think." Elon's interest was piqued, but there was a part of him that still wanted to dismiss it all as paranoia. Who are these people, and why would they go to all this trouble? Green leaned in, lowering his voice slightly. "The people pulling the strings are not who you might expect. They've been operating in the shadows, behind the scenes of your companies and other industries you're involved in. And they used your public outburst, your reaction at the restaurant, as leverage. They've been manipulating the media, your investors, and even your personal relationships to ensure that you remain distracted, focused on things that aren't part of the bigger picture. It's all been a game to them. And now, they're ready to take it to the next level." Elon was silent for a long moment, taking in the gravity of the situation. He wasn't sure whether to believe what Green was saying, but there was a nagging feeling in his gut telling him that there might be more truth to it than he cared to admit. The idea of shadowy figures pulling the strings, influencing his life from the shadows, was unsettling. "So, what do I do about this?" Elon asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and curiosity. "You want me to just accept that I've been manipulated, that my own actions were part of some bigger plan?" Daniel Green nodded. "Not exactly. But the truth is, Mr. Musk, you're not just being watched, you're being controlled. And if you don't act soon, these people will continue to pull the strings. You need to understand the extent of their reach." For the first time in a long while, Elon felt a chill down his spine. He had always been the one in control, the one making the decisions, pushing forward with relentless ambition. But now, it seemed like someone, or something, was pulling him into a game that was far beyond his understanding. "All right," Elon said finally, after a moment of silence. "I'm listening. What do I need to do?" Green looked at him with a somber expression. "First, you need to find out who's behind this. You need to identify the individuals who have been manipulating you, and you need to stop them before they can do any more damage. It won't be easy, and it won't be pretty. But it's the only way to regain control." Elon's mind was spinning, but he knew one thing for sure: his journey was about to take a very unexpected turn. He wasn't just fighting for his companies anymore, he was fighting for his freedom, his legacy, and the truth. And he was prepared to do whatever it took to uncover it. The air in the conference room felt thicker now, charged with an energy Elon had not felt in years. It wasn't the rush of new technology or the excitement of a groundbreaking idea, it was something else. Something darker. A sense of urgency. A hint of fear. Elon's mind raced as he processed Daniel Green's words. He had always been a man who thrived in chaos, someone who rose to the challenge when the stakes were high. But this was different. Someone, or something, was trying to manipulate his life from the shadows, and that was a threat unlike any he had ever faced. For a moment, he sat in stunned silence. His fingers gripped the edge of the table as his mind whirred. Was he really being controlled? Who would want to do that? And why? Green's cryptic statements hung in the air like a cloud, suffocating the space. Elon broke the silence, his voice steady but laced with determination. "If what you're saying is true, then I need to know everything. I won't sit around and let someone play me like this. I need names, locations, facts. Every detail you have." Green nodded, his expression unreadable. "I've been gathering information for months, Mr. Musk. It's a network of people, some you know, some you don't. They've been orchestrating a campaign to control how you are perceived, to distract you and disrupt your progress. We can't just take them head-on without a plan. But I have leads. I have people who can help." Elon's gaze hardened. He was no stranger to battles, but this was a new type of fight, an invisible war. His usual confidence wavered slightly, but his resolve remained firm. If someone was pulling the strings from behind the scenes, he wasn't going to let them succeed. Not now, not ever. "We need to move quickly," Elon said, his voice resolute. "Set up a meeting with your contacts. I'll handle the rest." As Elon stood up, his mind started to process the situation logically, the way he always did when faced with a challenge. This wasn't about his usual domains of space, cars, or clean energy. This was a battle for control over his life, his reputation, and ultimately, his future. And he would not let anyone take that from him. Green's face softened slightly. "We're in this together, Elon. I'll make the arrangements. But you should know, it's going to get dangerous." Elon nodded curtly, his jaw set. "I'm used to dangerous." The next few days were a whirlwind of secret meetings, encrypted communications, and tracking down sources who could help piece together the mystery. Elon's days were spent poring over documents, following leads, and making phone calls to trusted allies. His nights were filled with restless sleep, plagued by the nagging feeling that someone was watching him, waiting for him to slip up. It didn't take long for Elon to start uncovering unsettling information. The names that appeared on the pages were not unfamiliar to him, at least not entirely. There were high-ranking figures within his companies, influential players in the tech industry, and a few that Elon had worked with in the past, people who seemed too clean, too polished to have any ulterior motives. But as Elon dug deeper, the truth began to unravel. These individuals, some of them well-known figures in the world of technology and business, were connected to a shadowy group of investors and operatives who had been quietly working to influence the course of events in Elon's life. They were manipulating the media, steering the public narrative, and even pulling strings within his own companies. The more he uncovered, the more frustrated Elon became. He was used to being in control, but this situation was beyond his ability to handle alone. He was fighting ghosts, people he couldn't see, enemies he couldn't confront directly. As he sat in his office one evening, staring at the mountain of documents in front of him, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Green: "We have a lead. Meet me at the usual place in 30 minutes. Bring your team." Elon didn't hesitate. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door, his mind already racing with possibilities. Who could it be? Was it the person pulling the strings behind everything? Or just another lead that would fizzle out, leaving him with more questions than answers? When he arrived at the meeting spot, a quiet cafe in a nondescript part of the city, Green was already there, sitting at a corner table. His face was grim, and there was an urgency in his eyes that Elon had come to recognize. "There's someone who wants to talk to you. Someone from your past," Green said, his voice low. "They say they have information that can change everything." Elon's heart skipped a beat. Someone from his past. That didn't sit well with him. He had buried a lot of old business, old enemies, and old regrets. If someone was coming back into his life now, it could only mean one thing: trouble. "Who is it?" Elon asked, his voice cold. "Someone you trusted," Green replied. "Someone close to you. And they say they have proof that will blow this whole thing wide open." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Elon's mind flashed to the people he had worked with over the years, the ones he had trusted, the ones who had betrayed him, and the ones who had disappeared from his life altogether. Who could it be? Who would have the power to turn everything upside down? As they sat down to wait for the mysterious contact, Elon felt the tension in the air grow thicker. His instincts were on high alert. This could be the break he had been looking for, or it could be a trap. He didn't know which. But either way, he wasn't going to back down. Elon sat at the small cafe table, his fingers tapping impatiently against the edge of his coffee cup. His mind buzzed with questions, each one more unsettling than the last. Who could be reaching out to him now, and what did they know that was so important? His gut told him this meeting wasn't going to be as simple as a chat with an old acquaintance. It felt more like the calm before a storm. Daniel Green sat across from him, his face a mask of calm, but even his usual steady demeanor couldn't mask the gravity of the situation. "You're not going to like this, Elon," he said quietly, almost in a whisper. Elon raised an eyebrow, intrigued but still skeptical. "What's going on?" Green hesitated for a moment, then leaned in slightly, as if he were about to reveal a secret. "The person who wants to meet you. It's James Fletcher." Elon's heart dropped into his stomach. The name hit him like a punch to the gut. James Fletcher, someone from his distant past. Someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Their relationship had ended abruptly, and it had been a mess. Fletcher had once been one of Elon's closest allies in the early days of his tech ventures. He had been a trusted confidant, a brilliant engineer, and a loyal friend, until he wasn't. Fletcher had been the one to betray him, the one who had disappeared overnight, leaving behind a tangled mess of financial and legal issues. Their fallout had been one of the lowest points in Elon's life, and he had never fully understood why Fletcher had walked away without a word. Now, to hear that he was back, after all this time, sent a chill through Elon's veins. "Elon, I know this might be hard for you to hear, but Fletcher is the key, Green continued, his voice steady but urgent. He's the one who has information about what's really been going on. I've been tracking him for months. I've been trying to get to him, but he's been moving under the radar. And now, he wants to meet you. He's the one who can fill in the gaps, connect the dots. Elon's mind was racing. Why would he want to meet now? After everything that happened? I don't know, Green replied, his tone filled with uncertainty. But whatever it is, he believes it's time to come clean. And he's willing to share what he knows with you. I think he's got a story to tell, a dangerous one. Elon's eyes narrowed. He didn't like this. Not one bit. He had spent years trying to put the past behind him, to move forward, to focus on the future. And now, out of nowhere, James Fletcher was showing up again, ready to throw everything he had worked for into chaos. Where is he? Elon asked, his voice tight with the weight of old memories. Green looked at his phone and scrolled for a moment before looking up. He'll be at the old warehouse on 15th and Broadway in an hour. He insisted on meeting in person, away from prying eyes. Elon stood up abruptly, feeling a surge of adrenaline coursing through him. He was done sitting around, done letting this situation unfold without his control. This was his life, his legacy, and he would be damned if someone like Fletcher was going to control the narrative. He motioned for Green to follow. The drive to the warehouse was tense. Elon barely registered the passing streets, his thoughts consumed by the man who had once been his trusted friend and now seemed like a ghost from the past, a specter who had reappeared to haunt him once again. The memory of their falling out was sharp in Elon's mind. Fletcher had always been a genius, but his ambition and personal demons had led to reckless decisions, and in the end, it was Fletcher's betrayal that had nearly derailed one of the most promising startups Elon had ever been part of. As they neared the warehouse, Elon's stomach twisted. This place, dark, abandoned, and full of shadows, was a far cry from the cutting-edge tech labs Elon was used to. It felt like stepping into the past, a past he had tried so hard to bury. Green led the way through a rusty door, and Elon followed. The interior was just as bleak as the outside, a cavernous, dimly lit space filled with the echoes of forgotten machinery. At the far end, sitting on a stool in the center of the room, was James Fletcher. He looked different than Elon remembered. Older, more worn. His once pristine suit was now disheveled, his face marked with the lines of stress and regret. But his eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, were the same. And when Fletcher saw Elon, a flicker of recognition passed across his face, followed by something else, a deep, almost palpable tension. Elon didn't wait for an invitation. He walked toward Fletcher, his footsteps heavy in the silence. What's this about, Fletcher? After all this time, you think you can just show up and drop a bombshell on me? Fletcher didn't answer immediately. He just sat there, watching Elon with an unreadable expression. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and gravelly. I know I've got a lot to answer for. I know I'm the last person you want to see, Elon. But the truth is, I'm not the one who's been pulling the strings. Not anymore. Elon's brow furrowed. What do you mean? I've been trying to warn you, Elon, Fletcher said, his voice filled with urgency. You've been blind to the bigger picture. There's more at play here than just media manipulation or corporate sabotage. The people who are behind all of this, they've been watching you for years. They've been waiting for you to slip up. And now, it's too late. The words hit Elon like a punch. Who are they? He demanded. What do they want? Fletcher's gaze dropped to the floor. I can't tell you everything. But I can tell you this, they've infiltrated your companies, your personal life, and they've been using you as a pawn in their game. You think they've just been watching? No. They've been guiding everything you've done, pushing you in a direction that benefits them. And now, they want more. They want control. Elon's mind raced. Every instinct told him that Fletcher was telling the truth, but every part of him wanted to run, to shut out the nightmare that was unfolding before him. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a conspiracy of unimaginable proportions. Before he could say anything else, Fletcher stood up, his voice growing more frantic. "You have to stop them, Elon. You have to. It's not just about you anymore. It's about everything you've built. Everything you believe in. If you don't act now, it's all going to come crashing down." The weight of Fletcher's words settled over Elon like a thick fog. There was no turning back now. This was the beginning of something much larger, and far more dangerous, than he could have ever imagined. The air felt heavy as Elon left the warehouse. The words James Fletcher had spoken echoed in his mind, each one more unsettling than the last. He tried to process what Fletcher had said, about the conspiracy, the hidden puppeteers pulling the strings, and the infiltration of his companies. But it all felt too vast, too overwhelming. For a man used to solving the most complex engineering problems, this was a different beast altogether. "Do you believe him?" Daniel Green asked as they walked back to the car. Elon paused for a moment before answering. "I don't know," he said quietly. "Part of me wants to dismiss everything Fletcher said as another attempt to manipulate me, but another part of me knows he's not lying. I can feel it." Green nodded, looking at Elon with a mixture of concern and resolve. "Then we need to act. This is bigger than we thought. And the more you delay, the more dangerous it becomes." Elon's jaw tightened as he slid into the back seat of the car. He stared out the window, watching the city pass by. His mind was spinning, trying to make sense of everything. Fletcher's warnings, the implications of the conspiracy, the idea that his entire life could have been manipulated from the shadows, was it possible? Was it really happening? The more Elon thought about it, the more the pieces started to fit together. The strange press coverage, the odd business setbacks, the sudden bursts of negative attention, all of it could have been part of a larger plan. But who could be behind it? And why? He knew one thing for certain, he couldn't trust anyone at face value anymore. Fletcher had made it clear, this wasn't just about business rivals or the media. Someone, or something, was orchestrating his downfall from the shadows. And that someone had a plan that went far beyond the ordinary. This was personal. And it was getting very close to home. The next day, Elon called a meeting with his closest allies, his top executives at Tesla and SpaceX, his legal team, and Daniel Green. They gathered in a secure conference room, the walls lined with monitors displaying charts and figures. Elon stood at the head of the table, his mind focused, but his thoughts still clouded by what he had learned. "We've got a problem," Elon began, his voice steady but filled with a quiet urgency. "We've been compromised." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room, but no one interrupted. They all knew that Elon wouldn't make such an assertion lightly. "I don't have all the details yet, but someone, or some group, has been pulling the strings in ways we never expected. It's not just about competition anymore. They've infiltrated our operations, our communications, and even our personal lives. And they've been doing it for years," Elon continued, his eyes scanning the faces around the room. "I need all of you to keep your heads down. Trust no one outside this room. We're going to need to move in silence and act quickly." There was a moment of silence as the weight of Elon's words settled over the group. It was rare for him to show such vulnerability, but this was no ordinary situation. "Who are these people, Elon?" one of the senior executives asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "How can we fight an enemy we don't even know?" Elon looked at him, his expression unwavering. "I don't have all the answers yet. But I do know this, whoever they are, they've been watching us for a long time. We've been blind to it, but that ends now. We're going to start digging into every corner of our operations. Every partnership, every vendor, every contract. We'll find the leak." Daniel Green spoke up. "We need to be careful. Whoever is behind this has resources. They've been operating in the shadows for a reason. And they're not going to just let us take them down without a fight. Elon nodded. I know. But we don't have a choice. We fight, or we lose everything. With that, the meeting concluded, and the team set to work immediately. The next few days were a blur of action. They combed through the data, audited every internal process, and began tracking down anyone who might be involved in this covert operation. Elon's mind never rested. The more he uncovered, the more unsettling it became. It was clear that this wasn't some small-time operation, it was massive, sprawling, and embedded deep within the fabric of his companies. And then came the first breakthrough. One of the cybersecurity analysts flagged something unusual, an encrypted file buried deep in Tesla's internal servers, one that had been tampered with multiple times over the past year. The file had originated from a server in an overseas location, one that Elon didn't recognize. Someone had been accessing Tesla's most sensitive data, and they had been doing it for months, maybe longer. This was the crack in the armor they had been waiting for. Elon immediately instructed his team to trace the source. They worked around the clock, sifting through firewalls, tracing IP addresses, and following every lead they could find. And then, finally, the breakthrough came. The IP address led them to a location, an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Elon's heart raced as he processed the information. He had a feeling this was no coincidence. The warehouse had connections to a number of his old business dealings, including one with a high-profile investor who had mysteriously disappeared a few years ago. "We're going to pay them a visit," Elon said, his voice determined. Elon and Green arrived at the warehouse just as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the dilapidated structure. The air felt cold, thick with the weight of secrets. Elon's gut churned as they approached the entrance, the ominous sense that they were about to uncover something far more dangerous than they had imagined. Inside, the warehouse was dark and empty, save for a few scattered crates and abandoned equipment. But as Elon stepped deeper into the shadows, he saw something that made his blood run cold, a set of old files, neatly stacked, each one labeled with his name. They weren't just any files, they were sensitive documents, files that had no business being here. And then, at the far end of the room, he saw it, a figure standing in the dim light, a man with a familiar face. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized the figure. It was James Fletcher. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The dim light in the warehouse flickered as Elon and Green stepped forward. James Fletcher, standing there as though he had been expecting them, looked unchanged by the years. His eyes held the same cold, calculating intensity Elon remembered all too well. "Fletcher," Elon said, his voice steady despite the rapid beating of his heart. "What is all this? What have you been hiding?" Fletcher's lips twisted into a faint, knowing smile. "I see you've been digging, Elon. Good. That's what you're good at, isn't it? Digging into things people don't want you to find." Elon's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He had learned long ago to trust his instincts, and every fiber of his being screamed that this meeting, this moment, was far more important than he had realized. "What's going on here, Fletcher? Why the files? Why the secrecy?" Fletcher motioned toward the crates behind him, the stack of files labeled with Elon's name, the black ink on the covers bold and unreadable in the low light. "All of this, it's the beginning of the end, Elon. You've been played. All this time, they've been playing you." "Who?" Elon demanded, stepping closer. His patience was running thin. "Who's behind this? You need to tell me now, or this is over." Fletcher sighed, his expression darkening. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you, Elon." "Not yet. Try me," Elon spat. He was done with cryptic answers, done with the games. The stakes had grown too high. Fletcher stared at him for a long, uncomfortable moment, and then slowly, reluctantly, he spoke. "The people behind all of this, they're the ones who have controlled the financial world for decades. They've manipulated the markets, shaped global events, and even decided who would rise to power in major corporations like yours. They've kept themselves hidden in the shadows for years, but now they've set their sights on you. Elon's mind raced. What do you mean? You're saying there's a group of people who control everything? Like some kind of shadow government? Not a government, Fletcher replied, shaking his head slowly. More like a cabal. An elite few who control everything, from the stock market to world governments, to major tech companies. They've always been there, lurking just beneath the surface, pulling the strings. And your rise to power, your success, wasn't as organic as you think. They allowed it to happen. They nudged you into place. Elon felt a cold shiver run down his spine. This was beyond anything he had ever imagined. He was used to the idea of corporate competition, cutthroat politics, and the ever-present manipulation of media. But this? This was different. This was the stuff of conspiracies, the kind of thing people dismissed as fantasy or paranoia. Why didn't you tell me this before? Elon demanded. Why didn't you warn me when you had the chance? Fletcher's eyes darkened, a shadow crossing his face. I tried. But you weren't ready to listen. You were too busy climbing higher and higher, chasing the dream without realizing the strings were already attached to you. And when I tried to warn you about the dangers of trusting people who didn't have your best interests at heart, you pushed me away. I couldn't get through to you. The word stung more than Elon cared to admit. He had always believed that the world was built on merit, on the idea that hard work and vision would lead to success. But what if that wasn't true? What if the deck had been stacked against him from the start? So what do you want from me now? Elon asked, his voice low. He had no time to waste on the past. There was too much at stake. Fletcher looked up at him, his face hardening. You need to understand something, Elon. They're coming for you. They've already infiltrated your companies. They've made sure your every move is anticipated. They want to see you fail. And if you don't act soon, you'll lose everything. Elon's mind raced as he processed Fletcher's words. The shadowy figures behind the scenes, the conspiracy to bring him down, it felt impossible to comprehend. But something in Fletcher's tone, something in the way he had spoken, told Elon that he wasn't lying. This wasn't some petty revenge. This was real. And if he didn't act fast, he would be playing into their hands. What do I need to do? Elon asked, his resolve hardening. He was done being a pawn. Fletcher smiled grimly. First, you need to expose them. You need to make them afraid. But you also need to prepare yourself. They're not going to go down without a fight. Elon felt his pulse quicken. He had been through countless battles in his life, business rivalries, media wars, and personal betrayals, but this was different. This wasn't just about winning or losing a deal. This was about his life's work. This was about the future of technology, space exploration, and everything he had worked so tirelessly to build. He took a deep breath, pushing aside the doubt and fear that threatened to creep into his mind. There was no turning back. The battle had already begun. I'll take them down, Elon said, his voice filled with determination. But I'm going to need your help. Fletcher's expression softened just slightly. I'll help you, Elon. But you need to be ready for what's coming. You're going to make enemies, powerful enemies, and they won't hesitate to do whatever it takes to destroy you. Elon nodded grimly. I've been through worse. I'll take whatever comes. But I'm not going down without a fight. Fletcher paused for a moment, and then, almost as if testing Elon's resolve, he spoke. You're not ready for what's next. But you can't back down now. If you do, you'll lose everything, your companies, your legacy, and your future. Elon took one last look at the pile of files, the weight of the information heavy in his hands. He knew this was the beginning of something bigger than he had ever anticipated, but it was also the only chance he had to survive. To protect everything he had fought for. You have one chance to make this right, Fletcher, Elon said, his voice firm. And I'm taking it. We'll expose them. We'll turn the tables. And with that, the gears of war began to turn. The sun had barely risen, casting a faint golden glow over the city, but Elon was already awake. His mind was racing with thoughts of the conspiracy, the vast network of shadowy figures that seemed to control everything he had built. It felt like something out of a spy thriller, but the weight of it was very real, and it was closing in on him. He sat in his office, staring at the large display screen in front of him, filled with a cascade of financial charts, legal documents, and encrypted communications. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, knowing that the decisions he made in the coming days would either ensure his survival or lead to his downfall. Elon, a voice cut through the silence, pulling him from his thoughts. Daniel Green, his closest confidant and right-hand man, stepped into the room, his expression serious. We need to talk. Elon looked up and gestured for Green to sit. What's going on? We've been running background checks on all the key players involved in this, Green said, motioning to the array of data on the screen. And I'm starting to connect some dots that I didn't expect. It's worse than we thought. Elon's stomach tightened. He had expected bad news, but not this. What do you mean? Green sat down and leaned forward. These people, this cabal, whatever they're calling themselves, they're not just targeting you. They're targeting the entire tech industry. And not just Tesla or SpaceX. Every major player in Silicon Valley, every company that's been pushing the boundaries of technology. They've infiltrated everywhere. Elon's gaze hardened. So it's not just me, then. This is bigger than I thought. Much bigger, Green confirmed. They've been systematically manipulating events to destabilize the entire tech world. Every time a new tech company rises to prominence, they find a way to sabotage it. Every time a major breakthrough happens, they find a way to suppress it. It's all connected. Elon ran a hand through his hair, frustration mounting. He had spent so many years working to push humanity forward, to break barriers and explore new frontiers. To hear that there were forces working behind the scenes to prevent progress was both infuriating and terrifying. So, what now? Elon asked, his voice tinged with a quiet anger. How do we fight back? Green looked down at the table for a moment, then met Elon's eyes. We need to expose them. We need to make them feel the heat. If we go after them directly, we could end up in a war with the most powerful people in the world. But if we hit them where it hurts, publicly, economically, then we might have a chance. Elon's mind clicked into high gear. He had been in situations like this before, situations where the odds seemed stacked against him. But this was different. He wasn't just fighting for success or recognition. He was fighting for survival. I agree, Elon said, determination setting into his voice. But how do we expose them? We don't even know who they are yet. We start with what we know, Green said. We keep digging. We start leveraging every asset we have, every network, every contact, every piece of information we can get our hands on. We need to track down the people behind the scenes. The ones pulling the strings. Elon thought for a moment, then nodded. Get the best hackers we've got. I want every inch of data we can find on these people. I don't care how we get it, but I want it fast. Green stood up, his expression firm. I'll get started right away. But this won't be easy, Elon. They've been hiding for decades. They won't go down without a fight. Elon stood as well, his mind focused. I'm ready for the fight. We've faced worse before. The next few days were a blur of activity. Elon, Green, and the team worked tirelessly, digging deeper into the conspiracy, tracking down leads, and piecing together the fragmented information they had. It was like chasing ghosts. Each time they thought they had found a key piece, it slipped away, leaving them with more questions than answers. But one lead finally paid off. Late one evening, just as the office was starting to empty, Green walked into Elon's office, a file folder in his hand. His face was grim, and Elon could tell that something significant had just been uncovered. "Elon," Green began, setting the folder down on the desk. "We've found something. Something big." Elon's heart raced. "What is it?" Green opened the folder, revealing a series of documents and images. "This," he said, pointing to a series of emails, "is a direct connection to one of the key players in this cabal. A man named Jonathan Pierce. He's been operating in the background, pulling strings for years. And he's directly linked to some of the most powerful people in the world, governments, financial institutions, even some of the world's largest corporations." Elon leaned in, studying the documents. Pierce was a name he didn't recognize, but from what Green was saying, it was clear that Pierce had been instrumental in shaping the power structure that had been working against him all along. "Where is he now?" Elon asked, his voice cold. "We've tracked him to a private estate just outside of New York," Green replied. "He's been laying low for a while, but we have a solid location." Elon stood up, his mind racing. This was the break they had been waiting for. This was the opportunity to take down one of the key players in the conspiracy. But it wasn't going to be easy. Pierce would be protected by a network of security, both physical and digital. He would have resources that could track every move Elon made. Still, the opportunity was too good to ignore. "We're going after him," Elon said, his voice filled with resolve. "Get the team ready. We're going to end this." Later that night, Elon and his team boarded a private jet bound for New York. The tension was palpable as they flew through the night sky, heading toward their target. Elon stared out the window, his mind focused. There was no turning back now. This wasn't just about fighting back against the conspiracy. It was about taking the fight directly to the enemy and making them feel the consequences of their actions. As the plane descended toward the city, Elon knew that whatever happened next, this was only the beginning. The battle to expose the puppet masters behind his downfall had just begun. And this time, Elon Musk would be the one pulling the strings. The air around New York felt electric as Elon and his team descended into the city, the weight of their mission hanging heavy in the silence of the private jet. Every member of the crew knew what was at stake. This wasn't just another corporate maneuver or media battle. This was war. Elon's mind was still racing as they approached the private estate where Jonathan Pierce had been hiding. The man was elusive, like a shadow in the night, his connections sprawling into the highest echelons of power. For years, he had been orchestrating events from behind the scenes, pulling the strings of major corporations, governments, and influential figures. Now, Elon had tracked him down to this one small corner of the world, a place where Pierce thought he was safe. Elon's thoughts shifted to the cabal, this secret network of elites whose reach seemed endless. They had always been the puppet masters, and Elon was just one of many players they had used. But now, the time for manipulation was over. He had to take control of the situation, make the first move, and show them that he wasn't going to be another pawn in their game. The private jet touched down at a small, private airstrip just outside of the city. The estate was located in the suburbs, far enough from the city's prying eyes yet close enough to provide a quick escape should things go wrong. Elon felt a surge of adrenaline as he stepped off the plane, his boots hitting the tarmac with a thud that echoed through the quiet night. "Elon, we have to be careful," Green said, his voice low but urgent. "We're walking into the lion's den here. Pierce won't be alone. We don't know how deep his network goes." "I know," Elon replied, his expression unwavering. "But we've already waited too long. We can't afford to hesitate now." Green looked at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt. But all he saw was determination. He had known Elon long enough to understand that once the man set his mind on something, there was no stopping him. The team moved quickly and quietly, setting up a perimeter around the estate. They had spent the past few days gathering intel, tracking Pierce's every move. Their plan was simple: get in, get the information, and get out. There would be no room for error. As they approached the gates of the estate, Elon's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The moment when everything would change. This wasn't just about confronting one man. It was about taking down the system that had been controlling his every move for years. It was about exposing the puppet masters to the light. They made their way to the security fence, where Green pulled out a small device that would disable the estate's alarm system. With a few swift clicks, the lights around the property flickered and then dimmed, leaving the estate bathed in darkness. "Time to move," Elon said, his voice a quiet command. The team slipped through the shadows, moving with purpose. They reached the back of the house, where a large window provided an unobstructed view into what appeared to be a study. The curtains were drawn, but a faint light leaked through the edges, suggesting someone was inside. Elon motioned for the team to stop, and they waited in the darkness. Through the window, they could see a silhouette moving around the room. Pierce. Elon could feel the tension building in his chest. This was the man who had been pulling the strings, the man who had helped orchestrate everything that had gone wrong in his life. This was the man he had to confront. Green stepped forward and whispered, "Are we going in?" Elon nodded. "We go in, we get what we need, and we get out. No unnecessary risks." They moved quickly, slipping into the house through a side door that had been left ajar. The house was quiet, the only sound the soft padding of their footsteps on the polished floors. They crept down a hallway, and as they rounded the corner, they saw the study door slightly ajar. The faint sound of Pierce's voice drifted out, a phone conversation, Elon guessed. "Elon, we need to act fast," Green whispered. "He might not be alone." Elon nodded again, his resolve steely. "We won't be here long. Let's make it count." With that, they entered the study. Pierce was seated at a large mahogany desk, his back to them, engrossed in a conversation on the phone. He didn't notice the intrusion until the team had already surrounded him, guns raised, their movements silent and swift. The room went dead still as Pierce slowly turned around, his face a mask of surprise, but quickly masked with a thin, calculating smile. "Well, Pierce said, his voice smooth but tinged with a hint of amusement. "If it isn't Elon Musk. I should have known you'd find your way here eventually." Elon's heart was pounding, but his face remained calm. "You've been hiding in the shadows for too long, Pierce. It's time to come into the light." Pierce raised an eyebrow. "Is that what this is about? You think you can just waltz in here, guns blazing, and bring me down? Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" Elon took a step forward, his eyes never leaving Pierce. "I don't care who you think you are, Pierce. You've been pulling strings in the dark for too long. It's over. I'm exposing you and your entire network. You won't control the future anymore." Pierce's smile faded, and for the first time, Elon saw a flicker of uncertainty in the man's eyes. But it was quickly replaced by something darker, an almost predatory calm. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Elon," Pierce said, his voice lowering to a dangerous tone. "You think you can fight this alone? You think you can bring down an empire with a few hired guns and some fancy tech? You're nothing but a pawn, just like the rest of them. You'll never win." Elon leaned in closer, his voice cold and filled with certainty. "You're wrong, Pierce. The game is over. And I'm about to checkmate you." Before Pierce could respond, Green moved forward, his eyes locked onto the documents spread across the desk. They were detailed, encrypted files, exactly what Elon had been hoping for. Green grabbed them, passing them to Elon, who quickly scanned the contents. "These are the connections," Elon muttered, his fingers running over the pages. "These are the names, the players in this network." Pierce's expression darkened. "You have no idea how far this goes. You can't touch them." But Elon was already focused on the prize in front of him, the information that could bring the entire cabal crashing down. "You're right about one thing, Pierce," Elon said, his voice steady. "I didn't know how far this went. But now, I do. And now, it's over. As he turned to leave the room, the weight of the documents in his hands felt heavier than he had ever imagined. This was the evidence they needed to expose the puppet masters to the world. The war had just begun, but Elon Musk was ready to take control. The team made their way back to the jet in near silence, the gravity of what had just transpired weighing heavily on them. Elon sat in the rear of the plane, staring at the documents Pierce had left behind. The pages were filled with intricate details about the conspiracy, a web of connections, secret meetings, and deals made behind closed doors. As Elon skimmed through the files, a cold sense of realization settled in. They had only scratched the surface. This was no longer just about defending his companies or his reputation. This was about saving the very fabric of innovation that he had spent his life building. If the cabal's influence continued unchecked, the future of tech and space exploration could be shaped by those who cared only about power, not progress. Elon, Green's voice broke through his thoughts. We're almost there. What's the plan now? Elon looked up at Green, his eyes steely with determination. Now we make this public. It's time for the world to know who's been controlling everything behind the scenes. Green hesitated, the uncertainty palpable. Are you sure about this? Going public with this kind of information could turn the world against you. These people are powerful, and they won't go down easily. Elon leaned forward, tapping his fingers on the seat's armrest, his gaze unwavering. I know what's at stake. But if we keep this hidden, we're just giving them more power. It's time we put an end to their grip on everything. People need to know the truth. The gravity of Elon's words seemed to hang in the air, and Green nodded in silent understanding. The stakes had never been higher. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore, they were fighting for the future of humanity. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Elon's team worked around the clock, preparing the documents for release, verifying every detail, and ensuring that every piece of information was airtight. The world was about to be given a glimpse into a dark underworld of manipulation and control, and Elon knew that once it was out there, there would be no turning back. They used every platform at their disposal, social media, encrypted messages, private leaks to trusted journalists, everything to make sure the information would go viral. As the first reports began to circulate, the reactions were immediate. Some were skeptical, others outraged, but most were shocked. The truth was finally out. For Elon, the world seemed to shift as the news spread like wildfire. It was as if he could feel the balance of power changing, the tectonic plates of society moving beneath his feet. People were waking up, and those who had long been pulling the strings were suddenly being exposed. Pierce's name was everywhere, linked to corrupt politicians, powerful executives, and shadowy financial moguls. The reaction was swift and brutal. Stock markets fluctuated wildly, and within hours, several companies with direct ties to the cabal saw their stocks plummet. Major media outlets scrambled to verify the information, with some scrambling to distance themselves from the now infamous Pierce. But with the rise of the truth, came the rise of enemies. The backlash was swift. People began questioning Elon's motives. Was he really the hero in this story, or had he been part of the conspiracy all along? The media, once his ally, began to turn on him. A new narrative was beginning to form, one where Elon was no longer seen as the visionary entrepreneur who could lead humanity into space, but as a dangerous man with too much power. A few days after the release, Elon found himself facing one of the most difficult decisions of his life. Despite the massive public support, there were clear signs that the forces behind the cabal were already retaliating. Members of the board of Tesla and SpaceX were being pressured. Investors were pulling out, afraid that Elon's public battle with the elite would tarnish their returns. The pressure was mounting from all sides, and even his closest allies were starting to waver. One evening, as he sat alone in his office at Tesla headquarters, his mind was running through the worst-case scenarios. He stared at his phone, where messages from top-level employees flashed across the screen, offering their support but also warning him of the risks. "We can't let this ruin the company," Elon, one message read. You've always pushed us to think big, but this feels dangerous. He exhaled deeply, running his fingers through his hair. He had built Tesla and SpaceX from the ground up. His companies weren't just businesses, they were symbols of progress. If he lost them, the world would lose its beacon of hope for a better future. He had to hold his ground, not just for himself, but for all the people who believed in the dream of sustainable energy and space exploration. His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden chime of his office door. Daniel Green stepped in, his face tight with concern. "Elon, we need to talk," Green said, his voice low. "This is getting out of control." Elon looked up at him, frustration evident in his eyes. "Tell me something I don't know." "We've been getting some disturbing reports," Green continued. "There's talk of hostile takeovers of your companies. Tesla and SpaceX are on the verge of being gutted. They're using the media to turn the public against you. They're even starting to target your investors." Elon stood up, his hands clenched at his sides. "This is exactly what they want. They want me to back down, to let them win. But I'm not going to let them." "We might not have a choice, Elon," Green said. "The system is rigged. They have too much power." "No," Elon snapped, his voice hard. "I won't let that happen. I built this. I'll tear down whatever empire they've built if it means saving this future. It's not just about me anymore." Green met his gaze, the weight of his words sinking in. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to take the fight straight to them," Elon said, his resolve hardening. "I've exposed them to the world, but now it's time to make them feel the consequences. If they want a war, they've got one. But this time, I won't be the one who loses." Green watched him, a mix of admiration and concern in his eyes. "And if they come after you?" Elon's jaw tightened. "They already have. But I'm not going anywhere." The stage was set for the ultimate showdown. The world was watching, and Elon knew that the decisions he made now would shape the future. His battle wasn't just against the cabal, it was against the very system that had allowed this corruption to thrive. It was a fight for the future of humanity, for the dream of progress, and for the companies he had worked so tirelessly to build. The turning point had come. And Elon Musk was ready to face whatever came next. Elon stood in front of the giant floor-to-ceiling windows of his Tesla headquarters, gazing out at the city below. The lights of the skyline flickered like distant stars in the cold night. The weight of everything he had fought for pressed heavily on his shoulders, but the fire within him had never burned brighter. The world had seen the documents, the connections, the power behind the conspiracy. What followed was nothing short of a war on every front: media campaigns, economic sabotage, and whispers from every corner of the corporate world. The elite had begun to push back, and their counterattack was swift and calculated. Elon's phone buzzed on his desk, breaking his reverie. It was a text from Green: "We've got a problem. There's been a coordinated effort to tank the stock. Tesla's down 15%. SpaceX is next. They've hit us where it hurts." The timing was no accident. The cabal had waited for Elon's moment of weakness, knowing that public sentiment could quickly turn. With every report, every news outlet, the media painted Elon as a reckless troublemaker, someone who couldn't be trusted with the future of the tech world. The whispers of his so-called dangerous ideas began to gain traction. Investors pulled back, wary of what would happen next. But Elon wasn't someone who backed down in the face of adversity. He was the man who had launched a car into space, who had made electric vehicles a mainstream choice, who had defied all odds to build a space company. The more the world tried to push him down, the harder he fought back. He wasn't just fighting for himself or his companies, he was fighting for the future. He picked up the phone and dialed Green. The line connected almost immediately. "Daniel," Elon said, his voice steady but urgent. "What's the plan?" "We need to push back harder," Green replied. "The attack is coming from all sides, social media campaigns are flooding with negative stories, there are leaks about internal chaos, and the media's painting you as a loose cannon. Elon's jaw clenched, but his voice was calm. And what about the investors? They're scared, Green said. Many are pulling out. A few are even threatening to sell their shares publicly to force a drop. They're playing dirty. Elon walked over to the whiteboard in his office and began writing down a list. We need to turn this into an opportunity, he said, his mind racing. We can't just sit back and wait for this to blow over. If we do, they'll win. We need to show the world that they can't silence us. Green was silent for a moment. What do you have in mind? We go on the offense, Elon said, turning to face the board. We bring the fight to them, show the world the truth, but do it in a way that forces them to reveal themselves. If we go public with what we know about their financial holdings, their connections, and their manipulation of the markets, they won't be able to hide. We'll expose everything, and they'll have no choice but to back off. Expose them where it hurts, Green said, understanding immediately. In the wallets. That's right, Elon said. We don't just fight back with information, we fight back with power. We hit them in the only place they truly care about. The next few days were a blur of strategy meetings, late-night calls, and press conferences. Elon knew that the clock was ticking. The longer he waited, the more the cabal would entrench itself, and he couldn't afford to give them that advantage. His team began compiling everything they had, every piece of evidence, every connection, every piece of data that would prove the manipulation of markets, the creation of artificial instability, and the destruction of companies for personal gain. It was time to weaponize the truth. Elon made a bold decision. He would take this to the people directly. He would use his social media platforms, not just as a tech mogul, but as a person who had a responsibility to the world. He wasn't just exposing the cabal for his own benefit. He was doing it for the future of innovation, for the sake of the public who had put their trust in him. The morning of the press conference arrived. Elon stood backstage, feeling the weight of the moment pressing against him. The press gathered in front of him, eager for his next move, anticipating another groundbreaking announcement, or a massive PR disaster. Mr. Musk, how do you respond to accusations that you're destroying Tesla and SpaceX with your behavior? A reporter called out as Elon took his place behind the podium. Elon took a deep breath and stepped forward, adjusting the microphone. He looked out at the sea of reporters, their cameras poised and ready. For the first time in a long while, he felt the eyes of the world on him, and he knew this was a moment of reckoning. My response, he began, his voice calm and measured, is simple, the truth. A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. Elon continued, unwavering. For years, a small group of individuals, people who have operated from the shadows, have manipulated the financial markets, rigged the system, and used their influence to crush the dreams of innovators. I've spent my life building companies that push the boundaries of what's possible, Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, but I've come to realize that there are those who would rather destroy progress to maintain their power. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. I've come to expose that system. To expose them. Because it's no longer about me. It's about the future of humanity. We can't let these puppet masters control the course of our future. They have rigged the game, and it's time for us to level the playing field. A gasp rippled through the crowd as Elon reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. He spread them across the podium. These are the connections, the deals, the backroom negotiations that have allowed the cabal to control entire industries. These are the names of the players who have used their wealth and influence to manipulate markets and destroy companies. The room fell silent as reporters flipped through the documents, taking in the weight of what Elon had just revealed. The air was thick with anticipation. And I'm not done, Elon continued. This is just the beginning. If they want to fight, we will fight. If they want to destroy the future of innovation, we will stop them. Together. Elon's words sent shockwaves through the media. The stock market reacted almost immediately. Tesla's stock began to climb as investors, galvanized by his transparency, began to buy back in. Meanwhile, the cabal's proxies tried to discredit him, but the momentum had already shifted. The truth was out, and now there was no way to undo the damage. The public began to rally behind him. The more they learned about the conspiracy, the more they understood the stakes. Elon wasn't just fighting for his companies, he was fighting for the people who believed in the future he had promised, a future powered by sustainable energy, human exploration beyond Earth, and the endless possibilities of technology. But this was far from over. The cabal wasn't going to give up without a fight. The war was just beginning. Elon had anticipated the backlash. After all, exposing the corruption of powerful elites was never going to be easy. But nothing could have prepared him for the full force of what came next. Within hours of the press conference, the attacks from every corner of the world began. The media, once eager to hang on his every word, quickly turned against him. Some outlets claimed that Elon was trying to manipulate the stock market for his own gain, while others painted him as a paranoid conspiracy theorist who had finally cracked under the pressure of his own ambition. One of the most damaging narratives came from a high-profile interview on a major network. The anchor, a former ally of Elon's, painted him as a reckless, power-hungry mogul who would stop at nothing to destroy anyone in his way. The accusations of market manipulation were rampant. Elon Musk may be a genius, but he's also a threat to the stability of the global economy, the anchor stated, with an ominous tone. For hours after the interview aired, social media was ablaze with commentary. People who had once idolized Musk now questioned his motives. The hashtags #MuskManipulates and #DangerousElon trended on Twitter, with critics accusing him of using his companies as tools for personal vendettas. But what truly shocked Elon was the shift within his own circle. Investors, key business partners, and even some of his trusted board members began distancing themselves from him. The very foundation he had worked so hard to build seemed to be crumbling. At Tesla, the board convened an emergency meeting to discuss the growing public outrage. The tension in the room was palpable as executives debated how to handle the situation. Elon had expected some pushback, but this felt like an outright mutiny. "Elon, we need to talk," the head of Tesla's board, Rebecca Turner, said as she entered his office with a grim expression. "The company is in danger. Stock prices have taken a huge hit. Investors are pulling out left and right. We've been getting calls all morning from major stakeholders threatening to liquidate their shares if we don't distance ourselves from your recent actions." Elon sat back in his chair, his hands folded in front of him, trying to maintain composure. He had been through countless challenges in his career, but this was something different. This wasn't just about a project or a product. This was about everything he had built. "I understand the gravity of the situation," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But if I back down now, it's over. For Tesla, for SpaceX, for all of us. We can't let these people continue to pull the strings from behind the scenes." Rebecca shook her head. "Elon, we're not saying you shouldn't fight. But there's a way to do this without burning everything down. You've gone too far. People are losing confidence in your leadership. We need to find a way to regain that trust." "By doing what?" Elon's voice was sharp now. "Pretending like everything is fine. Hiding the truth because it's inconvenient. We need to focus on the business," Rebecca urged. "There's a fine line between standing up for what's right and self-destructive behavior. You're pushing people too far." Elon was silent for a moment, taking in her words. He had spent his whole life fighting for a better future, pushing against the tide of complacency. But now, that same drive was pushing him to the brink. Could he afford to keep fighting this battle when his companies were on the line? Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the cabal wasn't idle. They were pulling every string at their disposal to undermine Elon and his movement. The financial media outlets they controlled began to amplify the narrative that Elon was a danger to the economy. Meanwhile, corporate lobbyists started spreading rumors that his fight against the system was destabilizing the stock market, putting thousands of jobs at risk. Every possible avenue of attack was used to pressure Elon: personal smear campaigns, leaks of private emails, and even anonymous threats sent to his employees. They were trying to break him, to make him second-guess his decisions, to convince him that the fight wasn't worth it. But Elon was resolute. One evening, as he sat alone in his office, reviewing data and reports, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel Green: "We need to talk. It's getting worse. I think they might try to pull the trigger on Tesla's stock next." Elon's stomach tightened. Every part of him knew this was the tipping point. If Tesla's stock tanked any further, it could bring down everything he had built. And yet, he knew that stepping away would mean conceding defeat, something he wasn't willing to do. The next few days were filled with frantic activity. Elon's team worked tirelessly to counter the corporate media blitz, releasing more details about the cabal's involvement in market manipulation. But the damage was done. As Tesla's stock continued to dip, it felt as if the world was waiting for Elon to fall. Every new piece of information that came to light only seemed to deepen the distrust surrounding him. And yet, in the midst of all this chaos, Elon received a surprising message, a cryptic note from a familiar figure. "Elon, I have a way to level the playing field. Meet me in London. I have something you need to see." It was from Pierce, the enigmatic figure who had once seemed like an enemy but now seemed to be offering something that could change the course of the battle. The decision to meet with Pierce wasn't one Elon took lightly. He knew that the world was watching every move he made, and meeting with someone so deeply entangled in the events that had led to this moment could raise questions. But Elon had always operated outside the boundaries of traditional thinking. If Pierce had information that could shift the tide, he wasn't going to let anything stop him. He boarded a private jet to London, unsure of what to expect but determined to find out what Pierce had to offer. The flight was long, and his mind raced with possibilities. Could Pierce truly have a way to fight back against the cabal's overwhelming influence? Or was this just another trap? As the jet landed in London, Elon knew that the next few hours could change everything. And as he stepped off the plane, he was prepared for whatever was coming next. Elon's jet touched down in London, the cool morning air slicing through the steel-gray clouds that hung low over the city. He stepped off the plane with a sense of purpose, despite the storm brewing around him. The weight of the world was pressing on his shoulders, but in the midst of chaos, there was a glimmer of hope. Pierce's cryptic message had planted a seed of curiosity, and Elon was determined to learn what it meant. As he made his way through the terminal, he felt the eyes of the world on him. News outlets were already speculating on his every move. Was he running? Was he meeting with unknown allies to try to regain control? And if so, who were these allies, and what did they want from him? The constant buzz of uncertainty made it clear, every decision he made now was under a microscope. Waiting for him outside the terminal was a sleek, black limousine. No words were exchanged, just a nod from the driver, who opened the door for Elon. He slid into the back, the city of London blurring past as they made their way to an undisclosed location. Pierce had asked to meet him at a private residence, far from prying eyes. The mansion that awaited him was nestled at the edge of the city, a modern yet discreet structure that gave no indication of the powerful conversations that had occurred within its walls. Elon's nerves began to tighten as the car pulled up to the front. The door opened, and there he was, Pierce, standing by the entrance with an unreadable expression. "Elon," Pierce greeted him with a steady hand, leading him inside. "It's good to see you. But I must admit, I didn't expect you to come so quickly. Things must be worse than I thought." Elon nodded curtly, not wasting time with pleasantries. "What's going on, Pierce? You said you had information that could help." "I'm listening." Pierce led him through the house to a dimly lit room, where a large table sat in the center. On it, a series of maps, documents, and digital screens were spread out, evidence of a long-running battle that had been fought in the shadows. "I've been gathering intel on the cabal for years," Pierce said, his tone serious. "But it's only recently that I've seen the full extent of their reach. They don't just manipulate stock markets or control industries. They control governments, economies, and, most importantly, they control information. If you want to take them down, Elon, you'll need to strike at the heart of their power. Elon studied the documents Pierce pointed to. It wasn't just financial data. It was a network of influence, a map of key players positioned in positions of power across the globe, corporations, politicians, and even media moguls. The cabal's reach was more vast than Elon had imagined. "You've been watching this for years?" Elon asked, his eyes narrowing. "And you're just now telling me this? Why?" Pierce's expression didn't change. "Because you're the only one who can do something about it. You've made enemies, but you've also gathered an army of supporters. The public is on your side now. They want the truth. They want transparency. If you expose the cabal's inner workings, if you show people the scope of their control, you'll rally the masses to your cause. But how do we get to them?" Elon pressed, his mind racing. "How do we expose these people without them turning the world against me?" Pierce's lips curled into a slight smile. "The key is not to fight them directly. The key is to infiltrate their ranks. They believe they are untouchable, that they are above reproach. But they've made one fatal mistake, they've grown complacent. They think they can control everything, including you. They don't realize that you've already begun your counterattack." Elon's eyes flickered with understanding. "You're saying we have allies within the system. People who want to see this end as much as I do." "Exactly," Pierce replied, his voice gaining intensity. "We have people who are already working against them, people inside the system who can provide us with crucial information. We can't fight them with brute force, we'll fight them with intelligence, strategy, and leverage." The next few days in London were spent in secrecy. Elon worked closely with Pierce and a small team of trusted allies, each of them contributing their expertise. They began to strategize, to lay out a plan that could infiltrate the very institutions that had protected the cabal for decades. Every piece of evidence Pierce had gathered was carefully analyzed. They looked for weaknesses, gaps in the cabal's influence that could be exploited. It became clear that the cabal was vulnerable in ways that no one had expected. They had underestimated the growing resistance, and now they were on the defensive. In one of their late-night strategy sessions, Pierce leaned over a map, pointing to a series of coordinates. "These are the financial hubs. The ones where the cabal's wealth is stored. They are guarded with layers of secrecy and corruption. If we expose these, if we show the world how these hubs function, it will be the end of their control. We don't need to destroy them, Elon. We just need to expose them for what they are." Elon's mind worked quickly. "And what's our next step?" Pierce paused, then met Elon's gaze. "We need someone on the inside. Someone who can access these hubs, someone who can retrieve the data we need to bring them down. We already have one person in place, someone who can get us the final piece of the puzzle." The plan was set in motion. Elon, Pierce, and their team knew that the next move had to be calculated perfectly. There could be no mistakes. As the days passed, the media frenzy surrounding Elon's battle with the cabal grew even more intense. The public's curiosity about the truth, about who was behind the manipulation of markets and industries, had reached a fever pitch. But the cabal wasn't going to back down easily. They were fighting back with everything they had, using all their resources to stop Elon in his tracks. But for the first time, Elon felt a sense of control. The pieces were falling into place. He had the information, the allies, and the strategy. It was time to put it all together. Late one evening, Elon sat in a dark room, staring at his computer screen. The data had been collected. The documents had been verified. He was just moments away from making the final move, from revealing the cabal's operations to the world. It would be a risk, of course. The cabal would retaliate. But Elon had no intention of backing down. His finger hovered over the keyboard. One final press, and the world would know the truth. The weight of everything he had fought for rested on that one moment. "Are you ready?" Pierce's voice echoed in his mind, a reminder of how far they had come. Elon took a deep breath, then pressed send. The weeks that followed the decision to expose the cabal felt like a race against time. Elon had pressed send on the data, but the moment it was out there, he realized the true weight of what he had just done. The dominoes were set in motion, and there would be no stopping them now. Pierce's team had been busy. The insiders they had managed to cultivate within the financial hubs had played their part, gathering documents, emails, and contracts that revealed the cabal's tight grip on global markets. This wasn't just about Elon's personal vendetta or his desire for a power shift. This was about dismantling an entire system built on secrecy, manipulation, and corporate greed. The data Pierce had provided was explosive. It didn't just implicate one or two corporations, it implicated entire networks of interlocking business ventures, politicians who had been bought, and media giants who were complicit in covering up the truth. It was a complex web of deception that stretched across continents. The global scale of the cabal's control was beyond anything Elon had imagined. Elon was no longer just a businessman or an innovator. He had become the face of a movement, a symbol of resistance against an entrenched, corrupt system. But with that power came an undeniable target on his back. The cabal wasn't going to sit idly by as their empire crumbled. The release of the information was timed meticulously. A global press conference was scheduled. Elon, Pierce, and a few trusted allies would present the data, live, to the world. It was a high-risk maneuver. The cabal's reaction would be swift, and they would likely try everything in their power to discredit Elon, to bury the story before it could gain momentum. As the day of the conference approached, the tension was palpable. Elon's team worked tirelessly to prepare for every possible outcome. They had anticipated the media's response, knowing that some outlets would try to paint him as a lone crusader while others would outright attempt to discredit the information. But this time, they had something the cabal couldn't control, the truth. On the morning of the press conference, Elon stood before a massive screen, the weight of the world on his shoulders. The cameras flashed, journalists buzzed with excitement, and the world's attention was firmly locked on him. "Good afternoon," Elon began, his voice steady but filled with an undeniable resolve. "Today, the world will see how deep the corruption goes. What you're about to witness is not just about one man, one company, or one scandal. This is about a system that has been built to exploit the many for the benefit of the few. What I'm showing you today is only the tip of the iceberg." As he spoke, the screen behind him flickered to life, displaying images of documents, emails, and financial transactions that clearly tied the cabal to a network of illicit dealings. The room fell silent as the audience digested the gravity of what was being revealed. This wasn't a conspiracy theory. It was irrefutable evidence. Elon continued, detailing the extent of the cabal's influence. He spoke about how they manipulated global economies, controlled media narratives, and suppressed technological innovations that could have changed the world for the better. It was a damning indictment of the world's most powerful elites. The reactions were immediate. As the information hit social media and news outlets, the world's reaction was mixed but powerful. Some hailed Elon as a hero, a truth-teller who had risked everything to expose the corrupt system. Others, however, quickly mobilized to push back against him. The cabal, desperate to maintain their control, deployed every tool at their disposal: fake news, smear campaigns, and even high-profile figures in the media who questioned Elon's motives. The backlash came quickly and fiercely. Within hours, the stock market had experienced massive turbulence. Tesla's stock began to plummet again, and other industries tied to the cabal's interests followed suit. Powerful financial figures appeared on television, condemning Elon's actions as reckless and irresponsible. But Elon had anticipated this. The real battle, he knew, was not about the immediate effects, it was about the long-term shift in public perception. He had already seen the beginnings of a movement. People who had long been disillusioned with the status quo were waking up. They were beginning to see the cracks in the system. Social media exploded with hashtags like #EndTheCabal and #WeStandWithElon. Ordinary people from all over the world, many of whom had never considered the depths of corporate corruption, began to demand accountability. The power of social media was undeniable. While the cabal tried to control the narrative through traditional channels, the people were speaking up, and their voices were growing louder. As the days passed, Elon found himself constantly fighting battles on multiple fronts. He was dealing with the fallout from the press conference, coordinating with his legal team to defend against the inevitable lawsuits, and still trying to manage the operations of his companies. Every part of his life was under attack. But in the midst of it all, he couldn't ignore the growing sense of momentum. People were listening. They were starting to understand the extent of the cabal's control. The global resistance had begun. His fight wasn't just for Tesla or SpaceX, it was for the future of humanity. In a late-night meeting with his closest allies, Pierce spoke up. "You've ignited something, Elon. But the next step is crucial. The cabal isn't going to lie down. They'll regroup, and they'll try to hit you harder. You need to prepare for the next phase of this war." Elon's eyes narrowed as he listened. "What do we do next?" "We go on the offensive," Pierce replied. "We strike at their most vulnerable point, their financial infrastructure. We expose their financial networks, their hidden accounts, their dirty money. We hit them where it hurts the most, their wealth and power." The plan was set into motion. Elon and his team worked tirelessly to gather more evidence, to find the hidden accounts that funded the cabal's operations. They knew that if they could expose the full extent of the cabal's financial empire, they could bring them down for good. But as they prepared for their next move, Elon knew that the battle was far from over. The global response to the unveiling had been significant, but the real fight had just begun. The cabal wasn't going to go down easily. And neither was he. The next few months would be critical. Elon had ignited a fire, but it was up to him to fan the flames and make sure it didn't burn out. The world was watching, and the stakes were higher than ever. The world was watching. Every move Elon made, every word he spoke, was analyzed under a magnifying glass. The global response to his unveiling of the cabal's secrets had been powerful, but with that power came an intense wave of retaliation. The cabal, as expected, wasn't going to sit back and let their empire crumble without a fight. Their counterattack came swiftly, like a silent storm gathering strength, ready to unleash its fury. The first wave of retaliation was financial. Within hours of the press conference, Tesla's stock plummeted to near-record lows, dragging down the prices of other companies in Elon's orbit. The media, largely controlled by the cabal, launched a full-scale disinformation campaign, painting Elon as a reckless troublemaker who was destabilizing the global economy. They twisted every word he had said, framing him as a dangerous radical whose quest for power had gone too far. Elon's phone rang incessantly. Wall Street analysts, legal advisors, and media outlets bombarded him with questions, threats, and accusations. It was as if the entire financial system had turned against him in a coordinated effort to bury the truth. But Elon was undeterred. He had known that the cabal wouldn't go down easily. "It's not enough to expose them," he muttered to himself, pacing around his office late one evening. "We need to dismantle their entire infrastructure, piece by piece. We need to make sure they know we're not just attacking their wealth, we're going after everything they've built." Pierce, who had been with him every step of the way, entered the room with a solemn expression. "They're tightening their grip. But it's not over yet. The people are still with you. We've just got to outsmart them." Elon looked up from the window, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Outsmart them, huh? How exactly do we do that?" "We take their power from them, quietly, strategically. We exploit the cracks in their system. Every empire has a weak point. We've just got to find it." The next phase of their plan was set into motion with a quiet precision. Pierce and his team had been working behind the scenes, collecting further intelligence on the cabal's financial networks. The information they'd exposed to the public had been just a glimpse of the true scale of corruption. Now, they needed to dig deeper and reveal even more. The cabal's wealth was hidden in a labyrinth of offshore accounts, shell companies, and digital currencies that had been designed to evade detection. But there was a flaw in their system: human error. And Pierce had found it. A leak, a small crack in the otherwise impenetrable wall of secrecy, had given them the opportunity to access the cabal's most tightly guarded financial networks. It wasn't a matter of brute force, it was about using the cabal's own tactics against them. They would infiltrate their systems, expose their hidden accounts, and force their wealth into the light. "We've got them," Pierce said one night, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of excitement and caution. This is the moment. Elon knew the stakes were higher than ever. They had crossed a line, and the cabal's retaliatory measures would only grow more aggressive. But Elon was resolved. He wasn't just fighting for control, he was fighting for something much bigger: a new world order where power wasn't concentrated in the hands of a few corrupt elites, but distributed among the people. With the new information at their disposal, Elon and his team launched their next attack. The plan was risky, requiring them to exploit weaknesses in the cabal's digital infrastructure. A combination of cyber attacks and financial audits would expose their deepest secrets: hidden assets, illegal transactions, and covert operations that spanned across multiple continents. As the world watched, Elon's public persona began to shift. No longer the eccentric billionaire obsessed with Mars and technology, he was now a revolutionary figure, a symbol of resistance against a global network of corruption. News outlets, once quick to vilify him, were now forced to reckon with the mounting evidence. His press conference had ignited a firestorm, and now he was fueling it with each new revelation. But the cabal's retaliation was brutal. They weren't just targeting his companies anymore, they were targeting his personal life. Anonymous threats flooded his inbox, and one night, a group of heavily armed individuals showed up at one of his properties, only to be stopped by a quick-thinking security team. It was clear that the cabal was trying to intimidate him, to force him into submission. But Elon wouldn't be cowed. The more they pushed, the harder he pushed back. His resolve only strengthened with each new challenge. He had sacrificed too much to back down now. The news came in a wave, first whispers, then official statements. Major banks across the globe had begun to freeze accounts tied to the cabal's hidden wealth. The financial world was in turmoil. Insider trading had been exposed, shell corporations were dissolved, and global leaders who had been complicit in the cabal's machinations found themselves caught in the crossfire. Elon stood in the center of it all, watching the developments unfold. This was the moment he had worked toward, the moment when the cabal's power began to fracture. The carefully constructed system of wealth and influence was unraveling, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. But there was a deeper revelation waiting to be uncovered. As Pierce sifted through more of the financial records, he found a connection that sent shockwaves through the team. A key player in the cabal, someone who had been operating behind the scenes, pulling strings from the shadows, was revealed to be an even bigger threat than anyone had anticipated. This person was not just a financier or a politician. They were the architect of the entire system. Elon's pulse quickened as he absorbed the new information. This individual had connections so deep, so entrenched, that taking them down would require more than just financial transparency. It would take a coordinated effort to strip away their power at every level: political, economic, and social. "This is it," Pierce said, his voice grim. "If we expose this person, we expose the entire operation. But we have to be careful. This is the final piece of the puzzle." Elon nodded. "Then let's finish this." With the final piece of the puzzle in place, Elon and his team prepared for the final phase of their mission: the ultimate exposure of the cabal's puppet master. This would be the game changer, the revelation that would send shockwaves through every institution, every government, and every financial market. But it would also bring with it unimaginable risks. As the world braced for the inevitable fallout, Elon knew that the fight was not over. The cabal was more dangerous than ever, but the people were waking up. They were no longer content to live in the shadows of manipulation and deceit. And as long as he had breath in his body, Elon Musk would not rest until he had exposed the truth, and taken down the empire of lies that had ruled the world for far too long. The world had reached a tipping point. For months, Elon Musk had been fighting an uphill battle against a shadowy cabal that had controlled the world's financial systems, economies, and governments. His journey had been one of risk, revelation, and relentless determination. But now, standing at the precipice of this war, Elon knew that everything was about to come to a head. The revelation of the cabal's puppet master, someone far more influential and dangerous than anyone had ever imagined, had rocked the world to its core. The individual at the center of the cabal's operations, whose name had been hidden behind layers of deceit for decades, was none other than Gregory Holt. A man who had infiltrated every major power structure, from Wall Street to the White House, manipulating events from the shadows to further his own agenda. He was the mastermind, the architect of the system that had kept the masses under control for so long. The data had been gathered. The leaks had been disseminated. But now, it was time for the final act. Elon's team worked tirelessly, preparing for the public revelation that would change everything. They had set up a global broadcast that would go live across every major media outlet, from news networks to streaming platforms. The truth was about to be laid bare for the entire world to see. In the days leading up to the broadcast, Elon remained calm, focused. The stakes had never been higher. The cabal was no longer just a shadowy force. It was an exposed beast, its heart laid bare, and it would do anything in its power to fight back. Holt had resources, allies, and influence that spanned continents. But Elon had something far more powerful, the truth. The broadcast was scheduled for prime time, an event that would be broadcast to millions of viewers across the globe. As Elon sat backstage, his mind raced through everything that had led up to this moment. His journey had been one of high-stakes gambles, betrayals, and near-death encounters. But now, it was time to put an end to the reign of secrecy and corruption. The world needed to see the cabal for what it truly was. Elon looked around at the faces of his closest allies, his team members who had been with him through thick and thin. Pierce stood next to him, a quiet, unwavering presence. His team of cybersecurity experts, journalists, and whistleblowers had been the backbone of this entire operation, and they were about to bear witness to the culmination of all their hard work. "Are you ready for this?" Pierce asked, his voice low but resolute. Elon nodded. "It's time to end this." The broadcast began. As the lights dimmed and the cameras focused on Elon, he stood at the podium, the weight of the world on his shoulders. For a brief moment, he glanced at the teleprompter, but he knew that this was a moment that required no script. It wasn't about rehearsed lines, it was about the raw truth. "Ladies and gentlemen, the time has come," Elon began, his voice steady and strong, carrying the gravity of the moment. For decades, the world's systems have been controlled by a hidden group of elites. They've manipulated economies, controlled governments, and suppressed progress for their own gain. We've seen it in the scandals, the wars, the inequality that plagues our societies. But today, we're pulling back the curtain. Today, the puppet master of this global conspiracy is revealed. As the camera zoomed in, the screen behind him flickered to life. Images of Gregory Holt, the man who had orchestrated the cabal's operations, appeared on the screen, accompanied by a dossier of shocking information. The data spanned continents, with evidence of Holt's secret meetings with politicians, financial magnates, and media moguls. The trail of corruption was undeniable. Holt's empire had been built on a foundation of lies, but the truth was now out in the open. The cabal's hidden accounts, bribes, and illegal transactions were exposed for all to see. There was no turning back. "The power to change the world has always been in our hands," Elon continued. "We've been told that we are powerless, that we must submit to the will of the powerful few. But I'm here to tell you that we are not powerless. This is the dawn of a new era, one where truth and transparency will lead the way. We will not allow our world to be controlled by those who seek only their own gain at the expense of the many." The reaction from the world was immediate, overwhelming, and impossible to ignore. Social media exploded with hashtags like #EndTheCabal and #ExposeTheTruth. Protests erupted in major cities across the globe, as millions of people took to the streets in solidarity. For the first time in history, the people saw the depth of the corruption that had been hiding in plain sight, and they were demanding change. But as the chaos spread, so did the cabal's efforts to regain control. Holt, knowing his empire was crumbling, activated a contingency plan that had been prepared for just such an event. The power of the cabal's influence was not easily extinguished, and they fought back with everything they had. The media outlets they controlled tried to discredit Elon, painting him as a dangerous radical. They flooded the airwaves with smear campaigns and false narratives, but the truth was undeniable. The public had seen the evidence. They had heard Elon's message. And no amount of propaganda could undo the damage that had already been done. In the days following the broadcast, the world entered a new phase. The cabal's power was fracturing, but it wasn't gone yet. Gregory Holt, now a fugitive, was desperately trying to escape the inevitable consequences of his actions. The global resistance had begun, but the battle was far from over. Elon, Pierce, and their allies knew that exposing the cabal was just the first step. The real work lay ahead, rebuilding a world that had been shaped by lies and greed for far too long. But the people were ready. They had seen the truth, and they were ready to fight for a better future. The final confrontation was not one of weapons or violence, but of ideas, of truth. The cabal had once believed they controlled the world, but they had underestimated the power of knowledge and unity. Elon Musk, once a figure known for his vision of Mars and technological innovation, had become the face of a global movement for justice, transparency, and equality. The world had changed forever. And as Elon looked out at the crowds gathered in the streets, chanting for a new world, he knew that the fight was just beginning. But for the first time in history, the power was in the hands of the people. And that was a future worth fighting for. The battle against the cabal was over, but the war for a better world was just beginning. Elon had risked everything to expose the truth, and in doing so, had ignited a global movement. The system of power and corruption that had held humanity in its grip for centuries had been shattered, but the work of rebuilding was a long and difficult road. In the end, Elon Musk had proven that one person, armed with knowledge and determination, could change the course of history. The struggle for justice and transparency would continue, but the world had learned an invaluable lesson: the truth is the most powerful weapon of all. And with that, Elon Musk's legacy was sealed, not as a businessman or an inventor, but as the man who led humanity into a new era of transparency, freedom, and hope. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?